but I saw a thing, Michael. Michael Warnken is with me here in the studio.
Howdy.
He's a paralegal. That's something sort of like a paratrooper for the courts. I saw a thing on Facebook. It was a picture of George Washington, and superimposed above his head and below it said, "I didn't use the First Amendment to defeat the British."
That's true. That's true.
You know, without bullets and without guns, we wouldn't have been able to stop the tyrant. And today, in William Wagener's humble First Amendment opinion, well, we still are allowed to have a First Amendment opinion, I believe we've gone full circle. We're right back to where we were in 1774. Well, you found out, what about changing the public record?
Well, you know, I mean, obviously people say, oh, you're crazy, you don't know, but you and I both know that, you know, in a lot of courts, records get changed.
We know that for a fact.
And so when I looked through all the documents that he had, and I mean the documents, they had piles. He had an entire file cabinet loaded with you know, all the casework between their criminal defense all the way through. They sued them. It was interesting because at the end of the trial, they had documentation that showed that, that the state had won. But the dates didn't match when I went to the courthouse. They didn't match the docket dates.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
And then there was a notice of appeal filed by the defendants, the state and all the CPS and everything else.
And won.
And they won at the appellate court.
So why, Mike, why would they appeal if they won?
Yeah, you don't appeal a case if you win, and it didn't say you win in part and lose in part, in which they had something to appeal. No, they won outright at the trial
100%,
case.
according to the records.
But everybody that I've talked to who was there said that they had won, that Wilbur had won, that Wilbur and Pam had won. And
they won a $500 million default judgment, and they were starting to collect on it at the time they murdered Pamela.
Well, she died right around then, and the circumstances around her dying were really questionable. And all of a sudden, one of the places he was in burned, and then he got flooded out of another place and then burned again. So a lot of the documents that they had were disappeared, and the courthouse also had a fire where his documents were.
This is interesting.
And so
this is what happens when the bar decides who's judge and the bar decides who's your public defender.
Yeah,
this is what happens.
You know, again, the state as defendants win, and then they file a notice of appeal, and then they win. And so what I think happened was Gaston won, and they couldn't have any of the records because the records got into all the gory details. So what they did was they just destroyed them, and then they got an appellate court, you know, at a later date, past the point when you have a certain window after you lose in which you can appeal. And I think it was outside that time, and they just got the appellate court to say whatever they needed him to say. And the gentleman, it was funny because the gentleman actually from who was behind the desk actually was from went to school in Santa Barbara, so it was nice talking to him. But yeah, you know, I mean, he wasn't part of it, but I mean, obviously when you bring up these records, they're not consistent, the dates don't match the docket numbers. All of a sudden, you know, they win, and then they have a notice of appeal, and they win at the appeal, and yet there's no reason to appeal if you win. In fact, you can't appeal if you win. You can't. The appellate court will say it doesn't have jurisdiction for the person who wins. If you win outright, the appellate court has nothing to do with it. They'll say, I'm sorry. But the appellate court issues a decision. And then not only that, just for good measure, they strike him for $5,000. They say Gaston owes $5,000, and the compounded interest at this point in time would be about $20,000, and which they've never tried to collect on. So I'm really disappointed with what I saw both in Spokane, Washington, with regards in review of Wilbur Gaston, which, you know, it's just a giant railroad. The idea that there are checks and balances, or the idea that we can have a fair trial, you know, in Gaston's case, they got a fair trial, you know, in both instances. The jury said garbage, you know.
Gaston won.
And wrote it out and said, no, not guilty, on each and every last one. Each juror had their own verdict form, and they signed. Then on the other side, a lot of the documents were waterlogged, you know, and a lot of them were burned. So whatever record he had himself of the, you know, it's gone. The courthouse records are gone and burned. You know,
and the videotape for the trial is gone.
Yeah.
But I got a copy from someone who bought it way back before they realized how damaging it was to the state of Oregon.
Yeah, and they filed.
And that's on YouTube, and they're really not happy about that.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know
because it's indicting of the entire state.
Oh yeah, I don't know how you can turn around and reverse the thing, but at this point in time.
Well, I think, you know, we need special grand juries. We need a new president. We need a real change in government. Donald Trump is not a change. And this, what's his name, socialist, what's his name, Bernie?
Oh, Bernie Sanders.
He's not a real change. They're just more of the same.
Yeah.
So, hello, is this Ted? Hello.
Hello, William Wagener. Ted Visner here from Michigan.
Yeah, Ted, we're live on television, right? Anyway, I think we're ready, Ted.
Okay.
So, Ted, I interviewed you a month ago. Isn't it interesting? It's just about exactly a month ago.
Yeah, it was. You were here in Michigan. We were at my place there in Blanchard, and we had a good night. Had some pork chops on the grill, if I remember right.
I think we did. And it's I think the only time I ate meat that whole week, but they were really good. So we were talking about, you got to put in a PIN number there, 93845.
This is what you get with live TV, so.
Yeah, I mean, this is really live, people.
Oh, that's good.
We're on live in Santa Maria, and now it's being picked up by this talk show thing here. So, Ted, since I left you as de jure sheriff that you declared yourself to be after you ran for sheriff and you believe they cheated you out of the election, correct?
That's correct.
And since then, about a week ago on Thursday morning, you left home earlier than you had announced you were going to leave and drove into what was a Maxwell's restaurant?
Maxfield's Restaurant, yep, in Blanchard, Michigan.
In Blanchard, Michigan.
Actually left about a half hour earlier than scheduled so that I could make a few phone calls before a meeting we had here for the...
And nobody stopped you on your way into Blanchard's?
No. In fact, I didn't even pass another vehicle on that trip.
And so you got in there, you're at the restaurant. What happened?
Well, the meeting hadn't started yet. I was still in the parking lot. I was out of my vehicle making some phone calls and giving people directions on how to get to Maxfield that wanted to participate in the meeting. Standing in the parking lot when all these Isabella County sheriff's cars pulled in. I lost count at one point, but I think it was over 7 of them flooded the parking lot. And at that time, there was only two cars in the parking lot, other than all the police vehicles.
Wow.
So they came into the. I was on the phone, so I was standing there, much like I am right now, talking on the phone, and they swarmed in, driving fast, and all the doors were open, and I saw rifle barrels everywhere. It wasn't long. A bunch of people were pointing guns at me, and I had my hands up, and I had to forget about my phone call, and I didn't even have time to turn my camera on, and they told me to put my hands on my head and turn around and walk backwards. I did that, followed their directions, and I got closer to their car, and they said, get down on your knees. I did that. They came over, and they took a cigarette and my cell phone out of my hands and cuffed me, threw me in a car, and took me into Isabella County. Now, keep in mind, Maxfield's Restaurant is in Montcalm County, Michigan. Sheriff's vehicles were Isabella County sheriff's vehicles. They were right out of their jurisdiction.
Right.
So I think it was their plan to get me pulled over before I actually left the county, but that never happened. So they just came to Montcalm County.
So you were arrested, handcuffed, I presume?
Yeah. Kidnapped, handcuffed, abducted.
Yeah, I think kidnapped, abducted, because the warrant they had was dated for the next day, wasn't it?
Well, they didn't have an arrest warrant. I think, see, here's what
Well, that's what's surprising
the
about
plan
that.
was.
They almost never do.
They had a bunch of police at my house at the same time, and they were wanting to find bad stuff there. And I think they were wanting to get an arrest warrant based on the information that they were thinking they would find at my house, but I didn't have any bad stuff at my house. I'm not a bad person. They said they were looking for explosives, they were looking for detonators, caps, and fuses, and all this other stuff, and I don't have any of that garbage. I think what they were going to do is create the arrest warrant based on them saying and stating and finding things that would make me look like a terrorist rather than a person driving down the road without a license plate. So that's what ultimately ended up happening. They didn't find any explosives, any explosive residue, even though they said their dog hit on my safe in the basement, which gave them probable cause then to saw my safe in half. I have a $2,000 John Deere gun safe in my basement, and they just sawed through it. and because their dogs hit on explosives, and I keep shells in there, so obviously the dog would have hit on ammunition too. And they didn't find anything they needed, so the next day on the 18th, this all happened on the 17th, and on the 18th, they created an arrest warrant for my arrest that actually took place the day before. So it's all based in fraud.
Yeah, it sounds like it to me. So you're in jail. Now you're out this morning. You got out today, the 25th of September, after 7 days. And they brought you cake and ice cream while you were in your jail cell, right? And took you for walks in the park?
No. And it seemed like the politer I was, the more they threatened me. One gal said if I called her hun again, she was going to send me to the. I just said hun. I said thanks, hun, because she brought us a mop bucket to muck out our stall there. I said thanks, hun. I was just being polite, and I said it to everybody. And she thought I was sexually harassing her or something, and she said if I ever said that again, I'd spend 3 days in the hold. And I was like, holy cow! Gee, I'm sorry. So it was quite an experience.
Yeah, these don't sound like your friendly hometown police officers that you know them and they know you and you can work with them because they're reasonable people, does it?
I don't know when that disappeared.
Well,
we don't have that anymore.
We don't have it
They weren't
anymore.
all like that. There were some nice people there. There are some people there that know me and know what's going on and understand that there's some things wrong and they don't like it. They've always been the minority, but anymore it seems like they're becoming the majority, and it's kind of interesting to see this transition happen from their perspective. It's like this whole bus that went down. Normally, they're getting all of their friends involved because there's like 5 different policing agencies right in this county. There's Mount Pleasant Police, there's Saginaw Chippewa Tribal Police, there's the CMU Police, there's the State Police, and all they're all here. And usually, when they're out to,
Wasn't there an FBI
like,
thug that wandered through the jail and talked to you casually?
Oh yeah. Yeah, but let me finish this one point here.
Okay.
Normally, these policing agencies are all working together, kind of like a show of solidarity. Well, it seems like anymore that Isabella County is completely on its own. Like they're recognizing that Isabella County has created the mess, and they're all saying, "You made this bed, sleep in it," and that's kind of what it's looking like to me and to a lot of other people. That's why at the big showdown at the restaurant, there was only Isabella County Police. They didn't even have a Montcalm County Police there. So it looks to me like they're getting shunned by the other law enforcement people in the community here.
Well, yeah, they created a cluster F, and the other police departments don't want to be sued, so they're just going to back away because they know a lawsuit's coming. But
Yeah.
did they perchance know that you were holding meetings to reinvigorate the true Michigan militia?
Oh yeah, in fact they were joking about it while they were putting cuffs on me. Saying, "Well, you're not going to have your meeting today, ha ha ha." And it was funny because there were some people starting to show up at that point, and they said, "You can arrest us all. We're still going to have meetings, and they're only going to get bigger. They're only going to get better."
Well, good for those guys that showed up and went ahead with the meeting.
Yeah.
So you're in court one day after you're arrested, and I heard you announce to the judge you're going to run for president?
Well, I have to. What I'm seeing here, and I hate politics, and I see other people say they don't like politics, but I absolutely detest politics. And everything that we're seeing today, and I'm talking about from the county jails to the way our police treat our people, to the way that the sheriff and the jailer, walk around creating these mandates for their Nazis to follow, and they're all following blindly. I mean, somebody needs to grab the reins and rein this power in because it's out of control.
Well, I agree. I agree. The tyranny is out of control. And sitting next to me, you can't see him, but sitting at my right-hand elbow is one of the experts in the lack of representation in this country, Michael Warnken, who's a paralegal, and he would agree with you that the tyrannical movement by people in government is really out of control. So you announced for president, and I heard you only have 2 planks for your platform, and one was by executive order, you're going to do what with the U.S. Treasury?
Well, you mean disband the IRS and get rid of the Federal Reserve?
Yeah, you're going to take back the U.S. Treasury. In effect, dispossess the IRS and tell them they have no home in America anymore?
Right. Well, that's certainly one thing on the list.
And
don't
the
know
other
if,
the other thing was you were going to declare all home mortgages that were touched by MERS, they were all null and void. Did I understand that?
Yeah. Yep.
Say that. I want you to say it because maybe I miss.
But well, it's not going to be by executive order because, as you know, executive orders are unconstitutional. It will be done lawfully in accordance with the Constitution. These frauds will be exposed for what they are, and the people committing these criminal frauds against the people are going to be held accountable. You know, too big to fail, too big to jail is utter nonsense. I mean, it just promotes stronger and more greed and more corporate shenanigans than we can deal with, and it's got to stop. So by putting penalties back into the law and stop looking at corporate banks like Bank of America as corporations that can't be touched or jailed, we're going to start putting those people in front of juries of people in this country that have all lost their homes to these creeps and see what the jury wants to do with them.
So, Michael's got a question here. Can you hear Michael? Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, it sounds kind of ambitious, though, to be running for president from your position. Is that realistic, or do you want to just get the message out that you think that the banks have too much power?
There's a question in that.
I guess running for president is ambitious. Running for sheriff was ambitious. Learning the law was ambitious. I mean, building my business for the last 24 years was ambitious. So yeah, I would say that it is ambitious. Do I think I'm out of my league? Absolutely not. I mean, if you take a look at the candidates we've had in the past, and people like Obama getting up there and talking about the Constitution like he actually will adhere to it, and then watching what he does afterwards. We've got a bunch of empty promises here, and that's what our political systems become. We need people that make promises and stick with promises, and if that's ambitious, then I'm ambitious. But I do believe that, you know, my father gave me a country where a handshake would seal a deal. And if you try and operate in any capacity today, with trying to do it that way, you're 10 times out of 10, you're going to find trouble.
Yeah. My father was the same. He taught me that if I shake hands on it, that's the deal right there.
That was the contract.
That was the contract. When you shook hands, there was a meeting of the minds before you shook hands, and the shaking of hands was sealing the deal, and you had to live up to your word. That's what my father taught me as well. And I didn't see my father much because he was out in the Great Lakes as a Great Lakes sea captain working most of the year. I only saw him 2 months out of the year. But I want you to state again clearly, what are your two planks for running for president, the two things that you're standing on?
Well, the getting rid of and making known in every state the fact that MERS has been operating in fraud, and it's not acceptable. And subsequently, every mortgage that's been affected or touched by MERS is going to be cast out as fraud.
As null and void. I think in legal language we'd call it null and void, right?
Well, I think it'd be important to explain to people what MERS was. Shouldn't we explain? I mean,
well, MERS stands for Mortgage Electronic Registration
Systems Incorporated.
Services Incorporated. And in most states, including Michigan and California for a while, it wasn't even incorporated and registered with the Secretary of the State that you're in, whether it's Michigan or Texas or California, which means if it's on your mortgage during that period they weren't registered, your whole mortgage is fraud. But the judges are saying it doesn't matter, we're going to uphold it and let the bank foreclose anyway. And this is a major, major issue, and I see judge after judge just kneeling down on their knees and bowing to the banks and making illegal foreclosure rulings. And in checking some of the judges, I find that they have stocks in bonds, investments in Bank of America and U.S. Bank and Wells Fargo Bank.
And they're not recusing themselves.
And they're not recusing themselves when they hear these cases. And the worst case is Some of these judges have taken all their stocks and bonds in the banks and put it into a trust. So when they fill out their Form 700 in California, I don't know what they call it in Michigan, but in California it's called Form 700, what's it called, Michael? Public disclosure?
Yeah, it's the FPPC, Fair Political Practices Commission, Form 700, and it's also known as a Statement of Economic Interest. Anytime that you're in a position of power in the government, you have to fill this out. It shows your assets, what you have, what you own, your interests in certain things for those people who appear in front of you to know whether or not there's a conflict of whether or not you should be presiding over these things. And I've seen some people wiggle really hard when you bring up, you have an interest. I saw, a county supervisor up in Solano County one time. She was sitting over a matter dealing with trash. We brought up that we'd found out that she owned stock in a couple trash companies. And
conflict of interest.
When we bring these things up, boy, people start, you weren't supposed to know about that.
So to make it, I want to be very clear so I don't misrepresent you, Ted Visner. Your training is as a general contractor, right? You have a license, or you did have a license at one time.
Yes.
As a general contractor, and you spent 20-some years building buildings, correct?
Correct. That's correct, yep.
You were building this huge 8,000 square foot place out there in the wilderness of Isabella County as a battered women and children's shelter, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And then the 2007, 8, 9, 10 fiasco, banks too big to fail, collapsed, and Countrywide was holding your loan. They traded it over to B of A because they went out of business and declared it a completed loan. But in fact, it was not a completed loan. And I have the video that shows the windows aren't even yet. The interior walls aren't there yet. The plumbing isn't there yet. The electrical cords aren't in the walls yet. So it wasn't, and that was fraud. And then B of A said, pay us money or we foreclosed, and then they went ahead and foreclosed. Is that correct?
Well, the Bank of America knew they didn't have grounds to foreclose, and back in 2011, the Michigan Appellate Court actually ruled that MERS had no standing to foreclose on Michigan homeowners. This was a huge thing, and a lot of states are coming to this right now or have already come to this. Washington State is just announcing new case law that says basically the same thing. But here in Michigan, what happened was the banks didn't like this ruling, and they petitioned the Supreme Court in Michigan for an appeal. And the Michigan Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to appeal this. But what they did after that will blow your socks off. They didn't want it to be re-argued because they knew it was a losing case. They knew that they couldn't do it. But instead of allowing it to be heard at the Michigan Supreme Court level, they just overturned the Michigan Appellate Court decision that said MERS had no standing to foreclose on Michigan homeowners. So it's a real mess here, and it's a real mess everywhere, and it needs to be addressed. And we have to stop allowing the corporate greed and the banker greed to reign supreme on these decisions.
It seems odd because I've heard about this type of thing going on everywhere. People who went to war, and they have their paycheck from the military being sent to the banks, all of a sudden come back and their house has been taken from them. People all over the place who've been paying a mortgage for a long time. All of a sudden, the bank makes this weird demand, cough up, and then they don't, and so they start fighting, going through the procedure to take them. When I was up in Washington, I met this one lawyer and his paralegal, and I was talking to him, and they had cases where they were negotiating with banks, and they said the whole process at this point in time has become a railroad as well, where the banks basically get to decide whether or not they even want to negotiate with you, and it's getting so bad that the banks were able to go to the legislature and change the law and say, if you win your case against the banks, you can't win attorney's fees. So, I mean, they're fighting all these cases, and they're making it impossible for the layperson who bought a house in good faith, had been making payments, and then all of a sudden can just summarily have his entire all the equity snatched out of his house.
You're right on point here with this, and this needs to be brought front and center as soon as possible, because a lot of folks don't know what you just said.
Yeah, a lot of people
folks
would not
don't.
understand what Michael just said.
Well, I didn't mean to make it unclear.
But
No. It's not that it's unclear. It's just that when we start talking about some of the minute details about what the legislature's doing to help the banks, we're starting picking into these little details, and it gets cloudy for a lot of folks. I don't want it to go there really either, but it is very important that we try and clarify that, because we need to make a prima facie case out of that, because that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I have in my case where the legislation did exactly that, and I can explain it real easy. Back before the MERS decision, Bank of America was going to foreclose, and then they thought better of it, but they actually filed a notice in the paper that they were going to have a sheriff's sale, and they listed the redemption period at 12 months. Okay, when they did this again here this last November, they were running up to the statute of limitations to foreclose on my property, period. They ran it again, and they were able to do it with a 6-month redemption period because the legislators had changed the
So you have a mortgage, which is different than what we have in California, which we have trust deeds. And a mortgage allows you, after you go in default, to bring it current within a year.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Whereas in
But
California, they just take your house.
Okay. Well, that's
yeah, in California, they claim the right, though there's a lot of dispute about this, Ted. They claim the right because the trustee can be taken
It's different than a mortgage.
in 90 days plus, I think 31 days, about 121 days, they can take your house. But there's a Seventh Amendment that says nothing can be taken from you until
Without a
you have a jury trial of
true.
your peers. And there's this case of Cruden versus Neal, which somebody brought to my attention. The 1796 case out of Raleigh, North Carolina, where they said the jury is supposed to be made up of your neighbors that know you, not total strangers. And that never happens in today's so-called jury trials.
Well, not only that, I found case law in California where, not just case law, but statutes, that if they were going to use eminent domain, you had to have a jury. It's not just that the government could make this thing happen. They had to, those juries get in the way of these things.
The juries get in the way and won't let the tyrants in government do what they want.
Everybody. Yeah.
Especially those who are members of the British Accreditation Registry, otherwise known as the Bar. Ted, I want to be clear about this. So you have only 2 planks, and it's 1, make null and void all the mortgages that show any MERS appearing on it anywhere, any place, at any time.
yes.
And the second is to take back control of the Treasury, tell the IRS they're out of business and they have to make reparations to the people they took money from, and end the Federal Reserve. Do I understand you correct? So those are your 2 planks. Take back the Treasury and make null and void. So the people in the house, what if it's a renter in the house?
Well, the renters don't have anything to do with MERS, but if they're renting from a family or a couple or a man and woman or anybody,
So the landlord would get the house free and clear.
No, the renters don't. What you're talking about are people.
But other people watching won't know it.
Okay.
There's a lot of renters out there.
But you're saying people who buy their house should be giving up their house free and clear.
Yeah, but I can see where if the landlord gets the rental house back free and clear, he then could afford and probably would have to lower the rent because everybody else would be lowering the rent. So the renters would benefit as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on this. Now, I have another question. Who is your campaign chairman, or do you have one yet?
I don't have one yet.
That's going to be a
This is
big
real
job.
important, Ted. This is a really
If you're
important
going to be running
question.
a real campaign, that's
You need somebody with experience that's been down this presidential campaign road before. Do you have a phone number people should call if they want to help you? Because already I've gotten calls and messages on the computer from people that want to help you. Is there a phone number they could call?
Yes, I answer my phone whenever I'm awake. My number is area code
989 954
2814.
2814. Did I repeat it correctly?
well,
Yes, you did.
I didn't hear you.
Yes, you did. You had it. You might need to get a GoFundMe site for this also.
Yeah, I would suggest start with a GoFundMe site, and I would look at some disheartened ex-libertarians, ex-American Party, Constitutional Party people that have been down this road, because there's 50 different nations in this nation, and most of them have a slightly different procedure from getting on the ballot. So if you're serious and you want to get on the ballot, you actually need 50 state chairmans.
Yeah, I think it's probably more realistic to run for a local
He
office.
did. He ran for sheriff, and they didn't count the votes, which he claims they didn't count them
or
right.
frankly, push for more representation. Each House member in Michigan has about 100,000 people. You've got some of the most horrible representation in the United States. I mean, that's
He's experiencing that, Michael.
yeah.
But I never discussed that issue, and he hasn't looked at my videos where I interviewed you. I suggest, Ted, you and anybody who wants to help you, go look at the William Wagener YouTube channel and review the YouTubes. The tag word would be Warnken 1, Warnken 2, Warnken 3, Warnken 4, Warnken 5.
On representation.
On representation, and it's spelled WARNKEN.
Yeah, the only thing I'm critical is everybody who wants to change things, let's run for president. And even the president will find himself, I mean, JFK found himself in a very interesting situation when he tried to do something similar to what you were talking about 52 years ago. So, you know,
They killed him.
yeah, I mean, the bigger...
The big banks, what's his name, Murchison of Big Oil, it's now proven that Hoover and his vice president, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, also known as Lion Lyndon, and CIA operative, who's still alive, George Herbert Walker Bush, were all in a conspiracy with the banks to kill Kennedy. And that's what you're doing. You're taking on the people, the shadow government. So I suggest you pick up some bodyguards from the Bundy Ranch Rebellion on your way, and, look over your shoulder, because these people...
play to win.
They play to win.
They're not going to fear me, and that's okay. But I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And
Okay, I know you are. But didn't I warn you not to run for president a month ago?
Yeah, presidents.
Wait, let him answer. Didn't I warn you?
you did. You did.
Okay, and you're going to do it anyway. So my suggestion, if you're going to go ahead, you need 50 state chairmen that have some experience and know what they're doing, and you better start looking, because
And you got to start raising money like
you
crazy.
got to start raising money like crazy. But I think, just the promise to give everybody their home free and clear and put the Federal Reserve out of business, you'd have to do what Kennedy did. You'd have to print debt-free money from the U.S. Treasury.
Issue silver certificates.
And issue silver certificates again, and issue silver money and gold money again. You'd have to. Have you thought about that?
No, absolutely. That's what needs to be done. And that's what should have been done, and that's what would have been done if JFK would have been allowed to continue with this program, and we would be in a completely different country today if he hadn't been killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they hadn't murdered him, we would.
We still got to be brave. We still got to want the right things for our country, even if it puts us in danger. We have to stop seeing people run and hide because what they have to say isn't necessarily, top of the charts or what everybody wants to hear. We have to start caring about our country enough where we're putting our lives and our livelihood, and like our founding fathers did, on the line, because that's how important it is.
Corner there, opposite, on second thought, there it is. If you want to help Ted Visner, whose experience of over 20 years as a construction worker and now having to learn the law, that's the number to call. Direct to Ted and tell him what your experience is and what you're willing to do. Don't promise things you can't fulfill. That's his number. Ted, I want to thank you very much for calling in. I know it's almost midnight back there in Isabella County, Michigan, where you are. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, William. I appreciate it.
Anything else you want to say? I know I have one more question. People ask me, why were you in jail? Because I put it out on Facebook, you got out of jail today. And they all think you were in there for some horrendous crime. What was your crime? Exercising your right to travel?
Yeah. My crime was driving without a license plate on my vehicle.
Yeah.
And for that, I was looking at 180 days in jail. My bond with this Isabella County dictatorship that's going on here in this local community was set initially at $206,000.
Wow.
$206,000. Well, at my
Maybe
arraignment, they made it.
You know, you needed Charlie Sprinkle. We got to dig Charlie Sprinkle up out of the grave, because Charlie Sprinkle would make them run and hide.
I've seen Charlie stuff, and I've actually presented Charlie stuff to the state of Michigan. And you know, our courts here in Michigan are so completely arbitrary and capricious right now that it doesn't matter how right you are. In fact, the more right you are, the more wrong you'll look in court.
Michael Warkin's agreeing with you on that, and he's a paralegal.
That's hilarious.
I know. You know, and anybody that's run this gamut through the court with the solid, rock solid case and just watch what goes on, you sit there dumbfounded because, you know, my kids understand this stuff, but I'm looking at a judge with, you know, all these appointments and blah 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 blah, and he's just saying things that don't. It's completely nonsensical.
Yeah.
So we got to get our courts back, and that would be a third plank.
Would you grant what do you call it, to Irwin Schiff, who's sitting in federal prison for 10 years? What do you call that?
Absolutely.
Not amnesty, but
Pardon,
amnesty.
Yes. Irwin Schiff.
Pardon.
Yeah, would you grant a pardon if you were President Ted Visner?
Absolutely.
And to all the people that the IRS put in jail, would you grant pardons to all of them? And then order the federal marshals to arrest the IRS agents that testified against them?
Yes.
I like you, Ted.
Absolutely.
You know, if you're a woman, I'd be kissing and hugging you all over the place. I like you, Ted. I might even have dreams about hugging you tonight. I don't know. I like you. You heard that, Stephen. Anyway, it's been a pleasure having you on our live television show in Santa Maria here on Channel 25, people. People, you won't hear this stuff on ABC, Fox News, or CNN. You're not going to hear. I hope someday they're forced to have Ted Visner in a presidential debate, but you're going to have to get on a lot of ballots really quick.
Yeah, real fast.
Really fast. You're going to have to move fast on this, Ted, because this election's going to be gone in a heart blink, and they're going to install our next tyrant.
Bush or Clinton.
Yeah,
they'll pick which one.
They've already picked whether it's going to be Jeb Bush or it's going to be Hillary Clinton, who lets our ambassador, takes a gay ambassador and sends him to a gay-hating nation where he gets drawn and quartered and chopped and stabbed and
then erases all her tapes about it, and,
and then erase all our tapes,
which is a felony, and she's still able to run for president while most of us would be indicted and wouldn't see the light of day.
We'd never see the light of day. We'd be in Pelican Bay underground.
She goes on TV, and somebody says, "But you wiped your hard drive," and she was what, with a rag? I mean, are you kidding me? All of us would be like, we would be 3 foot deep for even making a joke like that. She's able to laugh about the fact that she broke federal law. No,
I think the tyrants are laughing at us, Ted. They're laughing at all of the common people who they've stolen our common law rights. And I was just talking to a woman in North Carolina. She's complaining that her grandson is being starved in foster prison, and she has pictures of him looking really thin and bony. And she's complaining, so now they're threatening to take her other 2 grandsons away from her to punish her for complaining. I mean,
that's the mechanism that they have in place to do that. We've lost our courts.
Yeah, they have. It's all the grants they have. It's the grant money that they're able to get. Somebody actually showed it. I've been wondering about the actual financing, and I have the actual document. I forget the name of the act, but yeah, they get $4,000 for every kid and $6,000 if you're a special needs kid. A lot of time the kid will be fine. They'll get them into foster care or whatever,
and they drug him down so he becomes a special needs.
And they could get
This is awful what they're doing to our children. I mean, they drug them down.
It's not CPS. It's not child protective.
Yeah,
protection.
No. See, let
him finish.
That's the language. You've got to say they're child protection. If you ever look at the Clean Water Act, it has nothing to do with Clean Water Act. It's what poisons they can get away with putting in. Yeah, you know.
Yes, I know, but when I I say that, I mean, Child Protective Services does not have the authority to write the court orders. So
Yeah.
the local county courts are complicit in this because they're the beneficiary
But-
Oh,
of the
absolutely.
federal monies that are brought in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and what you'll find is that the government employees now are the largest portion of our electorate. So what happens is the courts almost have to follow these things, because if they say no, the people who are voting for them are the 10 clerks that are sitting in the room, and they'll tell everybody else who's a government employee, we got to vote this judge out because they're not doing the things that get us the grant money. It's all these goddamn grants. I'm sure that the house snatching has to do with grants. You know, the banks probably get a certain amount of money for every house.
You know, it's interesting. Let me interject. This woman I was speaking to yesterday, this grandmother in North Carolina. Carolina apparently is one of the states that rejected federal matching funds to put children with the next of kin or family member. So they don't get matching funds to find a case plan that puts a child with grandma. So they want to auction them off because they get more money through adoption federal matching funds than they do because they wouldn't take those grants because they get more money the other way. Would you, if you were President Ted Visner, and it's January 21st, would you start vetoing all the federal matching funds?
Absolutely. In fact, CPS would be under the biggest microscope ever invented.
Well, how about we just lock them up in the FEMA camps they've built for us, and then we'll take one person every week and put them on trial, and they got, 50,000 of them? It'll take us a few decades to get them all on trial, but meanwhile, we'll keep them in FEMA re-education camps. I mean, I'm sorry.
All right.
I'm going overboard,
Well, listen,
Ted.
we've got 15 minutes. So
Yeah, we haven't talked about Bill Windsor yet.
Yeah, so we better get.
We got to go. Ted, thank you so much, and please stop in California and do a show live with us when you get here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sending that invite, and I'll make that happen.
Okay. Have a good
All
night.
right, thanks for having me on. You too.
Bye-bye.
Okay, good night, guys.
We just hung up. That was Ted in Isabella County, Michigan, running for president. God, you know, if he got on, the comedian that had Ron Paul on?
Colbert.
Colbert, yeah. If he got on Colbert's show,
Yeah, but that's such
I
a-
think he would win.
Listen.
The popular vote anyway.
Listen,
He would win the popular vote.
running for president is such a long shot in itself.
I know,
I think it's rather unrealistic.
and the question
I'm not against a guy saying it, you know. And in fact, somebody running for an office to advance an issue, that's practically the only thing you can do anyway. You know, you have to get some visibility to bring the issue up.
Well,
otherwise-
Judge Gray did that, and he didn't get anywhere. They wouldn't let him in the debates. And
Yeah.
He was a sitting judge in California.
Oh no, I agree. Yeah,
And the Democrats and Republicans said, we're not going to let Judge Gray in our
run
debates.
for U.S. Senate. Yeah, yes, absolutely.
He's running for U.S. Senate. He's on the ballot, but they won't let him in the debates. I mean, the elections are so rigged. That's why I
Yeah.
think it's going to come down to guns and bullets like it did at the Bundy Ranch.
William Windsor.
William Windsor. They put him away for 3 years in prison. The appeals go up. They prove that these prosecutors blatantly lied. The appeals court gets him out of jail. He files a lawsuit. And this just went down less than 30 days ago. I think the deadline is the 28th or the 29th of this month. They have, to that day, I'm not sure about the exact date, the 3-judge panel gave the state of Ohio 30 days to pay him $700,000 for his 3 years in prison wrongfully because of blatant felony perjury by members of the bar and others. Wilbur Gaskin, Daniel Smith. I mean, it's all over.
And Will Windsor. Those are your 3 topics for today. All horrible cases. And the one thing that we're not seeing in any of them, justice.
Yeah, we're not seeing any justice in any of these courts.
These are 3 different courts, 3 different places.
The best justice is when a judge just says, I'm dismissing this, take your bullshit and leave my courtroom, Mr. Prosecutor. That's justice.
That doesn't happen very often.
I'm Pamela Visner. Thanks for being with us today. And this is a book.